Assalamu alaikum. First, I would like to welcome you all. Okay, this lecture will be for year 2 of the second year. Okay, a novel, and we all know that our focus will be on Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Okay, and today, or in this lecture, we will be focusing on Gulliver's Travels as a satire. So if you're asked in the test, like, describe Gulliver's Travels as a satire, in what ways does Gulliver's Travels qualify as a satire? Okay, you're going to be answering it in this way. Okay, first of all, you have to define satire in literature. Okay, so let's talk about satire in literature, and of course the main elements of satire. And after that, after we define satire and after we give the main elements, we apply what we already wrote or introduced on the novel itself and the different parts of the novel. So the question is, what is satire and what are its main elements? Now, focusing on the word satire in literature. So satire is a literary genre form in which vices, follies, abuses, and shortcomings are held up to ridicule, ideally with the intent of shaming individuals and society into improvement. So in satire, or satire in general, is a literary genre. Okay, what happens is this literary genre is that vices, follies, abuses, and shortcomings, all these faults, okay, in society and humanity, what happens is that he uses, okay, these faults, vices, sins, follies, the mistakes, abuses, the violence, okay, shortcomings, the incomplete nature of humanity. All of these elements, okay, are used in a kind of ridicule, all right, in a kind of comedy, okay, humorous perspective. Okay, why does he use these in a kind of comic perspective, in a kind of comedy, in a kind of humorous way, a humorous nature? Why? Okay, here it is. Ideally, mainly, okay, with the intention of shaming individuals, showing the individuals in society, the people of society, their faults, and making like to make them feel humiliation and shaming, okay, individuals and society. So in what purpose? Into improvement. So if a human being is directed and shown his own faults in a covered and indirect method or way, what happens is that he tries to improve himself, to correct his faults. This is a consequence, a general consequence of being shown your own, okay, mistakes, your own shame. Okay? Now, what are the second part here is the main elements of satire. What are the main elements of satire? Number one, of course, you have to mention these in the test, okay, or your answer in the test. I need them, okay? Number one, the literary work must attack an institution. It should be aimed at a certain institution, okay? What kinds of institutions are we talking about? Such as government, the government. He ridicules and shows the ridicules the the abuses and follies in governments, in politics in general, religion, education, and etc. All these kinds of institutions, okay, are attacked by satire. Number two, it must be humorous, the element of comedy. The element of comedy is very the element of comedy and humor is very important in satire. Okay? So it has to be humorous. Number three, it should have a clear message as not to directly damage the fabric of society with a clear target. Now, it has to have an intent, an intention, a message. He wants to direct, the writer or the novelist directs his satire to the direction of these institutions, in direction of these institutions with a message. He shows them a clear message, a clear like advice. Okay, like you are mistaken in this part, okay, in this certain field. Now, why does it have to have a kind of message? So it doesn't just directly damage, destroy the unity of a society. It doesn't destroy something. He doesn't want to destroy society, the writer, the novelist. All he wants is it to let's say to improve the society, not to destroy it. Okay? Number four, a satire should be written in formal language. The writing itself should be formal, not informal. Okay? He is ridiculing, he is giving a kind of satire in a comic perspective or a comic form, but still the language itself has to be formal. Okay? Why? Because if it's informal, it will be something else called slapstick comedy. Okay? Direct comedy, just a comedy with destroying the fabric of society, a comedy that just mocks humanity or any kind of institution directly without any intention or message. Okay? But here he has a message in satire. Okay? So again, a satire should be written in formal language. A satire should be written in formal language. Okay? As to be distinguished, differentiated, separated from slapstick comedy. Okay, this is what the fourth element. Now we've got a fifth element. So it involves sophistication, and everyone may not totally comprehend it. So we're using formal language. We're using certain events in a satire, clear events, beginning, climax, end. Okay, in a kind of way that we can say covers the real intentions. The real intentions is to ridicule certain people, but he uses sophistication. Now, how do we use sophistication? Through allegory, metaphor, and symbolism. Okay, these are some aesthetic tools and tools used in literature to give sophistication and cover the real intentions of the writer. So in satire, sophistication is involved. The usage of these devices, literary devices such as, again, metaphors, allegory, the whole corpus itself is a kind of allegory. Okay, and of course symbols within the writing or the text. Okay, now let's go back. After of course we give the definition and the elements of satire, we start the application, or let's say identifying the elements or the parts of satire in Gulliver's Travels. We all know, of course, that Gulliver's Travels consists of four books. Okay, let's see book number 1. Book 1 in Gulliver's Travels actually serves as a political satire. Now, the word political satire. So what does this mean? It means that, of course, okay, we have different kinds of satire. So one of them is political. And this is shown in book 1 in Gulliver's Travels, in his travel to the island of Lilliput. Okay, let's see the elements of satire in Lilliput and in Gulliver's Travels, of course. Number 1, the Emperor of Lilliput. Now, what does he resemble? What is he a satire of? Okay. The Emperor of Lilliput is a satire of King George I. King George I of England, who is the ruler that succeeds the throne after Queen Anne. So after Queen Anne dies, George I succeeds the throne. Now, what happened, or when did this happen? Now, while Jonathan Swift was writing this novel, this happened, that George I, or King George I, was crowned. Okay? Now, the emperor in Lilliput is 6 inches tall. Now, that means he's very short, and he, Gulliver, of course, is a giant in comparison. So he's like indirectly saying that King George is 6 inches tall. All right, you know what I mean. So the emperor is 6 inches tall, as all the people of Lilliput, and is prone to conspiracies and jealousies. Okay, he is also obsessed of being in control, ruling his country from a huge palace. So this is an egotistical emperor, even though and in control and obsessed with control, and he's got all these vices of jealousy, and of course committing conspiracies, and of course these characteristics also are applied to the people of Lilliput themselves. So Lilliput is an island of conspiracies, island of jealousy, okay, with a king or an emperor who rules, who is obsessed with control. Okay, so of course this is his first reference and his first satire, okay, of the politics of George, the King George I. Now, what happened is that King George I imposed the rope dance. Number 2, the rope dance. Now, what does the rope dance make satire of? Okay. Now, in Lilliput, the Lilliputians who wish to obtain a social rank in society, that means they are they have or they hold certain ranks and certain responsibilities in society, they are required to perform a dance on a hanging rope. So we've got a hanging rope which is like 12 inches high above the ground. Okay, and they have to, the politicians have to stand on this rope and perform a certain dance. Now, the longer and the better one dances determines the received social rank. So if you dance more in a better way and for a longer time, you get a higher social rank, Of course, this is absurd. Now, and we've got 3 orders here now, or 3 different ranks: blue, red, or green. They're called the blue thread, red thread, green thread. Thread, of course, is the piece of cloth, okay, that you tie around your arm or neck or whatever. Okay, you can do that. So we've got blue, red, and green. These represent 3 orders in the time of King George I: the garter, the bath, and the thistle. Okay, which were found during the reign of King George I. These 3 orders were actually utilized by the king as a cheap method of buying political support. Now, King George I created these 3 orders, okay, as a kind of method, right, to gain political support from from the citizens or from certain ranks in society, certain people and powers in society. Okay, so he used this method to gain political support from the masses now, or the people in control. Okay, so Gulliver's Jonathan Swift uses his novel to ridicule this and to emphasize the real intentions behind creating these orders by, of course, George I, King George I. Number 3, the character of Flimnap. Flimnap is the Lord High Treasurer of Lilliput. Okay, he has a really high rank in Lilliput. Now, of course, we know how he got this rank. He got it by dancing for a long time and in a good way on the rope. Okay, now what happens is that he conceives hatred. Flimnap hates Gulliver. Okay, he hates him secretly in the novel. He holds contempt towards Gulliver. Now, who does Flimnap represent in reality? He represents Sir Robert Walpole. Robert Walpole is a Whig party. We have two during the reign of George I. We have two main political parties: the Whigs and the Tories. The Tory party and the Whig party. King George was was in support actually towards the Whig party. He was in support of the Whig party. Anyway, Walpole is a Whig party minister, and of course he is the first Prime Minister of England. He ruled for 20 years and was an enemy of the Tory party and of Jonathan Swift himself. So he hated Jonathan Swift, okay, Robert Walpole. So Jonathan Swift wanted to ridicule him and to mention him in his novel. So he created the character of Flimnap as to represent Robert Walpole. Okay? Walpole is a party minister and the first Prime Minister of England, ruling for 20 years. He was an enemy of the Tory party and of Jonathan Swift, both politically and personally. Flimnap conceives a jealous hatred for Gulliver when he starts believing that his wife is having an affair with him. Okay, this of course is presented within the events of the novel. Okay, of course, this is like ridiculous. It's why is it ridiculous? Because the Lilliputians are 6-inch tall, okay, and Gulliver is a giant in comparison. Okay, Flimnap is clearly paranoid, since the possibility of a love affair between Gulliver and a Lilliputian is widely unlikely, of course. Okay, but again, this is a kind of the satire that we were talking about. Number 4, high heels and low heels. Okay, now the high heels and low heels are political groups. Okay, political parties in Lilliput. Okay, now what do these high heels, of course, are the kinds of shoes. High heels are the kind of shoes that make you a kind of taller. All right, so high heels represent the Tory party in which Jonathan Swift, okay, is part of. So the high heels represent the Tory party, while the low heels refer to the Whig party. The Tories believe in the power of the king and the church as Jonathan Swift himself. Jonathan Swift believes in the rule of the king and, of course, with the support of the church, religion. King and religion, they are the ones that should be in control of a nation. That is what Jonathan Swift and the Tory party believes in. But the Whig party believe in having a parliament, the country for the people and the parliament. that checks the power of the king. So what they do, the parliament does, is it observes the king and his actions. Okay? Now, this is what the Whig party believes in. And of course, Jonathan Swift opposes this party. Now, the Emperor of Lilliput, at one point, favors the low heels and wears them himself. So, in Lilliput, okay, the novel, the Emperor wears low heels as he supports the low heel party. Okay? Now, what happened here is that, or after that, the Emperor wears one low heel and high heel. Okay, so he's like saying, I don't support one party over the other. So in a kind of ridiculous and comic way, okay, he wears one high heel and one short heel, low heel. Okay. Now, what happens is that this is a direct reference to King George I's attempt to appear as not to favor one party over another. As a king, he should not favor a party over the other. But actually, he does. So he wants to just, like Gulliver, Jonathan Swift wants to say that King George, okay, supports the Whigs, is in support of the Whigs, but he performs ridiculous, okay, and outrageous, let's say, moves or decisions or acts, okay, to show otherwise. But eventually he does support the Whigs. Anyway, there is also a kind of religious satire in book one. Of course, we have to mention both satires, political satire and religious satire. Okay, now, how is the religious satire formed? We've got two religious parties in Lilliput, the big Indians and the small Indians. Now, what is the difference between the ideas held by the big Indians and the ideas held by the small Indians? Actually, it's really strange. Like, the conflict between them is based on which side of an egg should be broken first. We want to break an egg. Should we break it from the small end or the big end? And this is the conflict between these two religious parties in Lilliput. Of course, this has a reference, or this is a reference towards a religion, okay, in England, and in specific, okay, the Catholics and the Protestants, okay. So the conflict between these two parties is based on which side of an egg should be broken. The big Indian represents Catholics, while the small Indian refers to the Protestants. At the time, now what happened is that at the time of Jonathan Swift, these two religious parties, okay, had numerous conflicts which lead to revolutions, which lead to war, okay. Now, at the time of publication of Gulliver's Travels, the conflict between the two religious groups had destabilized. It's reached to the point of destabilizing the British government over a century, over one whole century. Okay, this has been happening. The conflict has been on. Of course, there are further, okay, like we could say, events related to this within the novel itself, as the Catholics, or let's say I think the small Indians, fled to the neighboring, okay, island which represents France. But we do not need to mention this right now, or this is enough. Now, book 2. We're going to go to book 2. When Gulliver goes to the land of Brobdingdang, which is the land of the giants. It's also a political satire, but not on England this time. It's on Europe. So a political book two, a political satire on European politics. In this chapter, Swift changes his focus to European politics and institutional morality. Okay? The king is the questioner. Okay? And Gulliver is the expert. Immediately, we sense that what Gulliver says is naive. Now, what happened is that the king, okay, of Brobdingnag, is not that well acquainted to politics or the knowledge of politics. He is wise and everything, but he does not know that much about politics, and he asks Gulliver, okay, numerous questions related to the cultural and political aspects of England. Okay, and of course in where he comes from, so we understand it not as England, of where Jonathan Swift comes from was related to, which is Europe in general. Okay, so the king is the questioner, Gulliver is the expert. Immediately we sense that what Gulliver says is naive. Why is it naive? Why does his answers reflect that element of being naive? He who is Gulliver, is idolizing his country's customs institutions. He even lies about them. He gives lies. His distortion, therefore, is revealing. It exposes the actual working of the English system. He gives some abstract and ridiculous answers to the king. So we as readers understand that Gulliver doesn't know what to say. He's like embarrassed of where he comes from. He's embarrassed of the systems that he is related to. So therefore is revealing, exposes the actual workings of the English system. After listening to the different aspects of European society, the king that English history, the king that is not as Gulliver describes. Rather, it is a heap. Now this is what the king says: heap of conspiracies, rebellions, murders, massacres, revolutions, banishments. Okay, the very worst effects that avarice, faction, hypocrisy, okay, cruelty, rage, madness, hatred, envy, malice, and ambition could produce. This clearly summarizes Swift's overall view of the overall European civilization. It reflects the European civilization. Now, he concludes that the bulk of Gulliver's countrymen, now not only if we understand this, and many critics have related that this is one of the most famous statements okay, in Gulliver's travels and in literature. Okay. Now, we understand that he means humanity, not just the European, okay, civilization or European citizens or the European society. He concludes that the countrymen are the most pernicious race of odious little vermin that nature over suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. We are, he means that we are all just vermins. He wants to reflect that humanity is nothing but vermins, okay? That nature itself suffered from. This is a statement that is not only the most famous statement in the Travels, but it is perhaps the most famous in all literature in its assessment of the nature of mankind, not just the European society, of mankind, okay? So this is in book 2. Again, the questions asked by the king of Brobdingnag and the ridiculous answers, okay, of Gulliver. Okay. Now, book 3. Book 3, of course, is about the flying or the floating island of Laputa. Now, this is a satire on various aspects of science. So we got in book 1 politics and political satire and religious satire. In book 2 political satire on Europe itself, all of Europe. In book 3 satire on science, learning politics, the politics of learning, and contemporary life. So in book 3, the floating island of Laputa, and the aspects of the satire on science, education, politics of learning, and contemporary life. Here, Swift concentrates his satire on people's pride in reason. Reason. Okay, in Arabic it's called il-mantiq. Okay, pride in reason. Reason in Swift's era was valued above all other faculties. Okay, so he was in an age of science, extreme science, okay, and abstract sciences and reason, and everyone had pride in science and in reason. But Swift was against this. He believed that that religion has a huge role in humanity, and even more than sciences. Okay, and he wanted to propose limits as to science and the usage of science, or the importance of science. So again, Swift concentrates his satire on people's pride in reason. Reason in Swift's era was valued above all other, okay, faculties. Science was fast becoming a religion, with the telescope and the microscope as fountain heads of truth. Now, in this era which Swift belonged to, okay, people thought that truth only came from science. Knowledge came from abstract sciences, from the telescope and microscope. You don't believe in anything unless you see it with your own eyes and feel it. Okay, and truth can only be conceived, okay, through science. Okay, Swift found this unnatural. He felt that too thorough an emphasis, that here it is, if you can see the cursor of the mouse, he felt that too thorough an emphasis on reason obscured the human elements in a person's makeup. Even Swift's choice for the name of the flying island indicates his opinion of the age of reason. Gulliver explains to us what he believes Laputa to mean, but his speculations are wrong. The name Laputa comes from the Spanish and means the whore. We are reminded of Martin Luther's famous description of reason, that great whore reason. Luther became infuriated with reason because some of his opponents were using it to deny the Lutheran emphasis on faith, religion. Swift was generally sympathetic to the Lutheran adherence to faith and the system of morality built upon it. By naming the island Laputa, he warns his readers that he is deprecating those rationalists and abstract reasoners who are antagonists of faith. Swift was certainly not one of the optimistic typical of his century. He did not believe that the age of science was the triumph that a great majority of his countrymen believed it to be. Science and reason needed limits. Science and reason, in the eyes of Jonathan Swift, needed limits. You need to put and state limits to reason. Okay, that's what that's what Jonathan Swift believed in. Okay. And they needed a good measure of humanism. They need not to require absolute devotion. You should not be devoted totally to science in finding truth. Science will not give you the whole truth. Religion, faith will give you the truth that you need. Okay, so this is satire on aspects of sciences. Now, the people of Laputa, okay, all of them, cherished science and did experiments that were useless experiments, okay, that did not help in any way, did not improve their lives in any way. They were just detached from any kind of help, any kind of assistance, all right, to their daily lives. Okay. Now, number 4, book 4, the last book, it's satire on humanity itself in the land of the Hunanims. Okay? Now, here he says that the contrast between the Hunanims and the Yahoos is extreme. The horses, we got the Hunanims are horses, are actually horses. Now, the Yahoos are like, yes, animals, but in the shape of human beings. They are built in the shape of human, or created in the shape of human beings, but despicable. Okay? You know, disgusting. Okay? Their shape and the way they walk, their bodies are disgusting. Now, we have here a huge contrast between them. The horses are clean and sweet smiling. Their diet is temperate and vegetarian. Okay, their habits constitute the temperance that the 18th century thought characterized reasonable man, Stoics and Adam before the fall. The Yahoos, on the other hand, are human in form and feature. Yes, they are human in form and feature, but they are filthy and they stink. They are omnivorous, but seems to prefer meat and garbage. Significantly, they eat nearly everything prohibited by the biblical and Levitical food codes. Swift uses these details to make his comparison clear. The Yahoo's diet is depraved, whereas the horse's diet is like that of man before the fall. The fall of what? The fall of Adam. Okay, after eating, of course, the apple in heaven and being deprived from staying in heaven and placed or resituated on earth. Okay, so this is book 4 and satire on humanity. So this, what we mentioned today was actually, like, again, the whole elements of satire in Gulliver's Travels. You need, again, to answer this question and to fully address this question, you need to give the definition of satire, the main elements of satire, and what the types of satire, okay, reflected in each book, okay, and how it is reflected, the method by which Jonathan Swift, okay, satires the different parts of humanity, or, you know. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and wish you all the best.